Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to proceed now to introduce Rick DiMare. Before I do that, again, I'd like to return to the reading this section here from Law Science of Money. You may have noticed that I ended the previous section on a question, and I'm reading this to discuss why monetary reform legislation is so important, because the founders did not have a good conceptualization of money, and they did not properly define it or place it within the government so that it would not be usurped by private interests for their own benefit. Okay, so again, page 394, Stephen Zarlenga, Law Science of Money. Confusion over the nature of money. The main explanation reflects the thesis of this book, that as a group, the founding fathers didn't have a good understanding of the nature of money. Even today, the various schools of economics have not accurately defined or even agreed on a concept of money. This may be the greatest failure of economics, since money is at the heart of every aspect of it. Economists are still squabbling over the most basic question about money. The second grand theme, the nature of money. The battle has raged for centuries over this second theme. The nature of money, simply and broadly stated, is money a concrete power embodied in a commodity such as gold, or is it an abstract social invention, an institution of the law? Does it obtain its value from the material of which it is made, or from its acceptability in exchanges, due to the sponsorship or even legal requirements of the government? Or is it a hybrid, a combination of both of these factors? The supreme importance of the definition of money will now become evident. For if money is primarily a commodity convenient for making trades, which obtains its value out of intrinsic qualities, then it could be viewed more as a creature of merchants and bankers than of governments. However, if, as we have been demonstrating in this work, the true nature of money is an abstract social institution embodied in law, that is, a legal institution, then it is more a creature of governments, and the Constitution had better deal with it adequately. The Constitution must describe how a uniform currency is to be provided, controlled, and kept reasonably stable in a just manner. I am suggesting that the nature of human affairs requires government to have 4 branches, not 3. The 4th branch to embody and administer the monetary power. So the stakes involved in understanding this money game are enormous, whether a nation's rule book will promote justice or allow a form of economic slavery. Okay, that's the quote from Law Science of Money. And it goes directly to the objectives of the LAC, that we do not want to have this structural debt burden that is imposed upon the taxpayer to pay for speculators' guaranteed return, no risk returns. And so getting on now to Rick's introduction. Rick DiMare is, I am very impressed with Rick's research and scholarship. He has been part of the AFJM and the LAC now for, I think it's been 2-3 years. And the depth of his knowledge is very substantial. He has a law degree that was from his interest specifically in the monetary question. And he has done a substantial amount of work here with different iterations of monetary reform legislation. And one of the things that I'm particularly inspired by is the depth with which he has researched each of these subjects, going back to the Chicago plan and the coinage cases, legal tender cases. Rick has really provided AFJM and AMI with solid grounding from history. And as Arlenga used to say, the history is the data. So we base our policy, our legislative approach on the data, which is the history. And Rick is going to summarize his efforts here with the Greenback Restoration Act. Yes, the Greenback, of course, this happened around 1860 timeframe, 1861, well after the Constitution was ratified, and it helped support Lincoln and the North winning the Civil War. So I will now turn it over to Rick DiMare. Rick, please go ahead.
Thanks for that, Mike. Let's see here. First, I want to thank John and Lucille for being open-minded and patient, because my plan is so different than the AMRA. When Mike and Tabitha told me about Zollinger working on the AMA before it became the NEAT Act, I did an about face, so I stopped looking at the NEAT Act, and I came up with a very different plan when I found out there were two Chicago plans, and that the NEAT Act had followed the Fisher plan of 1939, which was a banker-friendly plan that sought to make the banks profitable. And that was kind of the period where the neoliberal period started, where that idea where if you make the banks profitable, it's going to trickle down to everybody. Well, of course, we know how that worked out. So I went back to the Simons plan, and I tried to design a plan, because that's where I think Zollinger was with the AMA. And see if I can go to the next slide. Why isn't that working?
Probably on the bottom of your screen.
Oh.
The bottom left, typically. If not, then you do have to, you're not in slide set mode.
I better get that.
No, can you hit a down arrow by chance?
I just tried to do that, Steve, and it just, oh, here we go. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Slide only. Okay, there it goes. So this is where I get the three titles from my act, and my title one is named after Zollinger's reform number 1, and these are all on chapter 24 in the book, and I renamed them a little bit, but they're basically tracking those 3 reforms. I have say another. There we go again. It's not working. I better go back to the navigator. So the reform number 2 needs a little explaining because he says ending fractional reserve banking, but it means these other things also. He wants to create end fractional reserve banking. It's true, but he also wants to end all money creation as debt, as bank credit and debt, and he wants to end money creation as fictitious loans. That's Saudi's words, and he wants to end the boom-bust cycles. So and to kind of invoke his presence here and let him explain that the AMA, before it became, again, this is before it became the NEAT Act in 2009, I'd like to invoke his presence and just let him, in his own words, say here, and I can get this link. Paul LeBeau told me about this video, but it cut 9 minutes into this presentation, but I think it's important.
It didn't open on our end.
Can you see it now?
No.
No, right.
Can you see it?
No,
I think you'll have to stop sharing and then reshare it.
Nationalize the Federal Reserve.
Can you see him now?
We can hear it.
Oh,
Oh, you can't see him.
if you stop sharing and then reshare, so it didn't go from your slide set directly
You have to share video.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And click the sound button in the lower left.
And you have to do all that before you get into screen share.
Should I get out of this then? And
Yes. Yeah, if you're gonna go
Get
ahead.
out of screen share.
Right.
And then
so stop sharing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stop sharing. Yeah.
And then share the video.
Okay. Oh, I see.
Yeah, hit share again and then share video.
Share again. And,
if there, yeah, I don't know how it works for sharing video, but when you click on share screen, there might be I know for audio, there's an option at the bottom. Yeah, that worked.
Are you seeing them now? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me try to.
System. Put it into the U.S. Treasury. Virtually all central banks in the world today are parts of their government. They belong to their governments. Not in America. In America, we have an ambiguity where the Federal Reserve System, people think it's part of our government. It truly.
People are seeing this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We're hearing it. The video's not advancing, but we hear his voice.
Oh, okay. Well, he does emphasize that reform number 2.
I think hearing it is sufficient, Rick. If you just play it, the parts we can hear it. We know it's his voice and it's coming from him.
Branches. Well, there are no other branches. It's not part of our government. It gets its own budget. It doesn't have to get a budget from Congress. It gets it from its money operations. The reason it's ambiguous is the president appoints the chairman, right now Chairman Bernanke, for 4-year periods, and the board for 14-year periods. So there's that ambiguity. But it's essentially controlled by the banking fraternity. We put that into the U.S. Treasury, number one, first step. But that alone doesn't do it. And we know that because the Brits did that in 1946. They nationalized the Bank of England. It worked for a little while, and they immediately got their social programs. They got healthcare. They got a lot of good things. And when they first started it, about half the British money was thereby created by government. But they didn't do the whole thing. And we learned this from history. We look at the facts of history, and then we adjust to what we must do now. In Britain, they allowed the private banks to continue creating money through what over here we call a fractional reserve process. So we learn from the British example, because while immediately when they took over the Bank of England, half the money in the UK was created by the government through the nationalized Bank of England, the other half was created by the private banking. When you look today, 95 to 97% of all the money in England is created by private banking. Only 3 to 5% is created by the government, because the bankers are organized. They know what they want. They don't even have to form a lobby, but they do. And they keep moving in a particular direction. They get what they want over time. Whereas the people only get active during a huge crisis, such as we have now. And so it's going to be important that we use this crisis properly. So the first thing, you nationalize the central bank. That's not enough. The second thing, you must, through accounting rule changes, and this is not difficult. Accounting is a matter of defining what you want. Through accounting rule changes, you remove the power of banks to create any part of our money supply. And I must emphasize any part. You get people who are saying,
this is the part I wanted to emphasize. There is no partial plan. A lot of people are recommending a 2-circuit or 3-circuit plan, but the GRA totally
create half of it. We know from the Bank of England that doesn't work. Let them create 25%. That you let them create any part of the money system, and that will be enough for them to ultimately regain total dominance over the money system. Our money is created through accounting privileges that the banks have. When they put a loan into an account, it becomes money when that gets spent by the person who got the loan. So essentially, someone will sign over their assets and their collateral, and the bank will put a credit. It's just created on.
I guess that's enough. I just wanted to emphasize that second point, because under my plan, there is no way that the banks, according to Simons, we must make it impossible for them to create bank credit. And so I have a more complete separation between the transaction accounts. And let's see if I can get back to the slides.
Yeah.
Is that visible?
No, you shared the screen first,
Oh, okay.
and then you gotta go to your slides and then share that screen. Sometimes if you share the window, you can go back and forth between YouTube and the slides, but that'll take a little practice.
Are my slides showing now?
Yes.
Yes, they are.
So I'm just briefly going to touch on the differences here. This is the Chicago plan of 1939. This is the plan that the NEAT Act followed. This is what was, when people say the Chicago plan, this is what most often what's referred to. And this was designed by Fisher, 43 pages. And it's designed to strengthen the private bank system, the Federal Reserve bank note, and to maximize shareholder value. That's the Friedman term of member banks. It requires the banks to hold 100% reserves, but only for checking accounts, while giving the banks title to savings and time deposits. Kind of outrageous there, but he's actually telling you that when you don't put your money in a checking account, you're giving the bank an unsecured loan. And in that case, if you don't have FDIC insurance, you would definitely lose your money eventually. So this is not restrained by any Congress-sponsored coin standard. And this is because after 1934, the Federal Reserve notes become legal tender. And as Zallinger said, the banks will figure a way to get their banknotes prominent and take over. And that's what happened in the early 1930s. Because we had U.S. notes back then, and the banks, this is the way they squeezed them out. So this is the main plan used to formulate the NEAT Act. And Zallinger, my point here is Zallinger was on track with the American Monetary Act of 2010, which was not based on this plan. The NEAT Act does not, as he said, faithfully contain the reforms that he had begun to articulate in the AMA 10. So this is what he was basically following, trying to give effect to when he was working on the AMA 10. And this is the original Simons plan. It's not a single paper. It's actually a series of papers. But it was launched on March 16th when Simons sent a letter. He was the main author of it. And it drew attention of the banking establishment. I think it kind of spooked them, because you'll see a bunch of events that happened right after. But his Chicago plan is it begins with that letter in March 16, 33, but it contains these other documents. So it's a little more complicated than the Irving Fisher plan of 39. But this is in the reference materials I've uploaded at Stephen's site at monetary.org. So you can get the full, this is just part of it. And there's links to all these documents. So what does the GRA do? I'm going to go through 10 items here. The first 3, it fully integrates the Federal Reserve System into the government, including all payment systems and check clearing houses. The 12 regional Federal Reserve banks retain their names, but essentially become divisions of the U.S. Treasury. It expands the Treasury Direct system by commandeering and federalizing all tellers and ATMs of existing. I know that sounds a little radical, but essentially the tellers and ATMs, I explain this a little more down here, but they become like postal service accounts. So what is the Treasury Direct system that's being expanded? It is this system that does exist now, and Bob Hockett brings this up a lot. He wants to use this to fund. He believes in a 3-circuit plan where this would fund certain accounts. If there's a downturn in the economy, this would feed money into individuals' checking accounts. But before the GRA is enacted, the Fed corporate network is the Treasury's fiscal agent here, and that means legal servant. So the Treasury has to take the Fed has to take a back seat to the Treasury when this system is being used. But after the passage of the GRA, the Fed would become an actual part of the Treasury for both these investment grade U.S. bills, notes, and bonds, which is what the system offers now. You can't get currency greenbacks out of this system yet, but you can get investment grade bills, notes, and bonds. And but after the GRA, they will also offer legal tender greenbacks, and there would be no independent Fed to issue any kind of its own private currency. So this is the system that is in existence now, and it will take over the currency expansion. And now this might sound a little radical, but I have the GRA, and this is following the Simons Plan of 33. But we annul all state chartered financial institutions over a 2-year period. And this is because the states sometimes give, a lot of states have privacy rules that you can't even tell who owns these banks. But that's just one reason why they're going to be annulled. But over a 2-year period, they're annulled, and they're separated into the deposit and transaction accounts, which will be run directly by the Treasury, which is the new central bank. And the investment portion, anything to do with investing or lending, will get separated into these investment trusts. And these are federally chartered. Congress will stipulate in the charter that they cannot provide depository services. So it completely shuts the door. It makes it impossible. As we know, Glass-Steagall was overrun in '99 by, I think, the Liley Act, or the Graham-Liley Act, I think it was. So that wall was never that effective anyway, but this is an actual separation, but people won't notice much of a separation. The bank will be exactly the same, but if you look on the right, whenever you're dealing with on the bottom part there, whenever you're dealing with an ATM machine or a teller, you will be dealing directly with the Treasury here. But if you want a loan or an investment of some kind, like Stephen was talking about different various levels of risk, you would go upstairs or across the aisle, but that would be a separate corporation, private corporation, and they do the lending. Federal government is not a lender under the GRA. I mean, it can if it wants to, but I try to avoid it. So the fifth thing is it replaces all Federal Reserve credit notes, which is what we have now, with, and these are words from Simons. He wants one homogeneous Treasury Direct money, and this will be in paper and electronic, and I'm going to call them Federal Reserve promissory notes in current U.S. coin. So this is what the note was. This is what it looked like before the Great Depression. And before I discuss this note, I just want to make two definitions up here in blue. Receivable money is something that you can reject if it's tendered to you when it's offered to pay for something. But when something's legal tender or lawful money, by operational law, it cannot be rejected when tendered. I mean, you could reject it, but then by law, in theory, you would get the item free, or the service would be free, and your bill would be considered paid if you absolutely refuse to accept it. So that the legal tender laws are very strict when they're enforced, and the Fed did not have legal tender powers under this note. This was receivable money only. It was not legal tender. It was redeemable for lawful money. So it said right on here, redeemable in gold on demand at the Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. So it's redeemable for, and what was lawful money at the time was U.S. notes, gold and silver, or copper coins. So this note was constitutional, as I say down here, and it complies with the legal tender cases. There were 9 of them, and it's issued under the borrowed money clause, not the coinage clause, because this is considered helping Congress borrow on its currency, on its greenbacks and coins. So this is a legal note, but the note that Simons wanted was here on the right. What we would have had is Simons call for, as Zollinger said, number one thing is fold the Fed into Treasury. And his second requirement was that the Federal Reserve note, after that happened, becomes lawful money, becomes legal tender. Of course, the Fed was never folded into Treasury, but this Federal Reserve note did become legal tender in 1934. But this would have been the one that Simons wanted right here. And this would have been legal tender. I mean, again, assuming that the Fed is in Treasury. It's lawful money is, at the time, because gold was banned, it would be redeemable in silver or copper coins because gold was banned. This also complies with the legal tender cases. And again, it's issued under the borrowed money clause, not the coinage clause. And it represents the property of the depositor. And this is constitutional. Now, this is not a note we've seen, but this is what Simons wanted. And it sounds like, I have to mention this because this is a greenback. It doesn't look like it. But if you have the Fed folded into Treasury, this is a greenback. This is the note we got. And it was, as I said, I think the Simons plan in 33 spooked the Fed. They immediately sought legal tender status for their banknote. And this is what we have now, this note. It just says on it, this note is legal tender for all debts, private and public and private. This allows money to be created as bank credit. It is not redeemable for current coin. It became, banks can give you coin if they choose to, but they don't have to. It became legal tender under the Gold Reserve Act of January 30th, 1934, a few months after Simons was issuing his 1933 letters. He issued about 4 of them. And so they took immediate action and got this through. I don't even know if Simons knew that this became legal tender in that date. But the lawful money, now that it is legal tender, it is lawful money. And what is it redeemable for? Other Federal Reserve notes only. Again, banks could cover themselves and say, "All right, we'll give you coins if you want them," but they don't have to. They are only obligated to give you other Federal Reserve notes. This represents debt owed to banks. It cannot legally represent the property of the depositor. It does not comply with the legal tender cases and should not be legal tender. It's not authorized by either the coinage clause or the borrowed money clause and is not constitutional. So this is the note on the right that we'd get under the GRA. It would be redeemable. We don't have silver coins now or gold coins, but it would be redeemable for copper coins. And that would make it comply with the legal tender cases. Again, this would be, if we see this note someday, this is a greenback. It says Federal Reserve note on it, but this is after the Fed has been folded into Treasury, so it is a greenback. It's issued directly by the Treasury. It's redeemable for legal tender, lawful money, which is, as I said, copper coins. It complies with the legal tender cases. It's issued under the borrowed money clause, not the. So I'm kind of rejecting the Nadelson theory that money comes from the coinage clause. It does not. Paper money comes from the borrowed money clause. This represents the property of the depositor and the holder, and it is constitutional. So if I put the 4 notes side by side, the one with the red X is the one we should not have. And if you notice, the only difference between the original note that existed before the Great Depression, the redeemable, just the gold standard leaves, and then this note is for it becomes redeemable in silver. And then in 1965, we get rid of silver, so the note on the far right is redeemable in current coin. So that relationship between coin never changes just because the metal type changes. That was my point there. And so the GRA causes a complete separation between deposit and investment banking. It makes it impossible. You don't have to trust the banks to hold the transaction accounts in bailment, because it's impossible for them to do that. It makes impossible what Simon calls effective money. That needs to be defined, but Simon's used that term to refer to money that is basically looks and feels like money and acts like money, but it should not be money. It's because it's competing with the sovereigns, greenbacks in this case. It's and serving to block the entrance, the restoration of the greenback. So Simon's goal was to make it impossible for banks to create effective money, and that's what the GRA does. It might seem a little radical in some of the reforms, but it does what it needs to do. Now, there's a 10th goal that I want to talk a little bit about, the check system, and why the GRA does the radical thing of taking over all tellers and ATM machines. And it makes them actually federal employees, like they're working for the Postal Service or something. But the check system has resulted in the banks, this is Saudi, creating money. And he explains in this book, I think it's Money versus Man, 1931. There's a full explanation there, and there's a link to it in the reference materials I posted at monetary.org. And so this is what Saudi says, and I just try to give a quick example here. The debtor walks into a bank to negotiate for a loan, which the bank ultimately approves, and then issues Mr. Debtor a paper or electronic check for $10,000. When does new effective money first enter the economy? And I have the answer here is E. Mr. Debtor deposits the bank check. It's when he deposits the check into his account and the check clears, new money has been created by the check system itself. So when the bank gives a loan, they do not go into their vault and take out cash. So they've devised a way to create money as check. And Saudi explains this very well. And Simons is not as good at it as Saudi. And I have another example. I changed the hypothetical a little bit here. So when does new U.S. sovereign money, greenbacks, first enter the economy? And the answer is never. Ever since 1930, the Fed has figured a way to completely push U.S. notes out of the economy through the check system mainly. I mean, the banks will supply some coins if needed, but well over 90% of the money is by check. And again, Saudi explains this very well. The check system has reduced the state money to a trivial proportion of the whole. So, and he also is great at explaining how the banks, through this process, they call it a loan, but it's not a loan at all. The banks have just created illicit money, and they call it a loan. So Saudi gets all over him for that, and he tries to. I think this word embezzler is important because that's actually what's happening here. He's identifying what's the actual crime that's being committed at the top. Embezzlement has to do with betraying the public trust in this case, and that's what the Fed is doing. They're embezzling money through the checking system. So that's the reason why that was number 9. That was why I have a complete separation between deposit and investment banking. And that's why the GRA takes over all checking accounts and transaction accounts. So, but the Treasury wants nothing to do with lending money or maintaining or servicing the bank's loans. The banks will get to keep that, and those will be profitable, but they will be having to lend actual money that's in their trust bank account. It's called a trust corporation. So now the last issue here is why am I making? It seems like cash is being phased out, and why am I in the GRA making it a constitutional right at the will of the holder if the holder requires it, which is going to be rare. In ordinary times when things are working fine, the holder was ordinarily not going to ask for cash. I think the use of cash will continue to diminish. But unless we have an emergency situation and some kind of it could be like a nuclear attack or something that puts out the payment systems. Ordinarily, though, people are not going to ask for cash. But the GRA does make it a constitutional right at the will of the holder, and this is the words of Salmon Chase from the Civil War era, and when he was Chief Justice. It makes a constitutional right to redeem electronic greenbacks in paper greenbacks, and the right to redeem paper greenbacks in current coin, even though they're cheap metal coins. As John Conroy recommends, we could substantially increase the face value of these coins, and that's what Zollinger recommended also in Law, Science, and Money. So, so I'm trying to explain here in these next few slides why access to cash is important. Of course, the cryptos guys their heads are gonna explode if they saw this. But access to cash is important, even in the digital age, and even if no one actually takes possession of the cash. And the question arises, can't see whose picture I get here on the right. I think that's Varoufakis, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
So he has an interesting video. I won't play it, but he says he wants to know, is money a tangible or an intangible? And he says it's a bit like light, a stream of he says, is it a stream of particles or waves? And he said Einstein comes along and says it's both. Two things that are contradictory, both a thing, a commodity, a tangible, and a form of credit, an intangible. So then he asks, so what is money? Is it a thing? Is it a promise? And he says it is both. And I think what Mike just read from page 395 of Zollinger's book, he said the same thing. He said, or is it a hybrid, a combination of these factors? So that's what it is, and that's what they're saying. Now, Henry George said a similar thing. Also, I think appealing to heat and light and physics. He says exertion is always the real measure of value, yet to get a common measure of value, we must take some result of exertion, such just as just as to find a common measure of heat and light, we must take some tangible manifestation of those forms of energy. So he says, it is because commodities, being results of exertion, are tangible manifestations of exertion, that they are generally and naturally used as common measures of value. So, so here I just show like a $1 coin. Again, I'm not recommending anybody take physical possession of coins, but this is the relationship between exertion and coins. So it would take 10 times the labor to create 10 coins as it would one. But of course, to add a 0 to a piece of paper or to hit an extra keystroke, there's no meaningful relationship when it comes to paper money or electronic money. So he says the purpose of coins is to keeping tally and facilitating transfers, as is served by the chips or counters often used in games. So again, it's important to at least keep in mind that the money is being backed by coin, even if you never take physical possession of them. Saudi says something similar, that if it was possible, I think Joe Polito said something about this, if it was possible to put all money in physical tokens or counters, it would be impossible for banks to take advantage of that. But of course, nobody's going to do this. And I'll read Saudi's words. Let there be no mistake as to what is wrong. All banking tricks could not be performed if the money were made of physical tokens or counters, which cannot be made negative in number. So unlike a bank loan, when somebody pays it back, it reduces the money supply. This doesn't happen. Of course, Gassel would say we want money to expire, but not all the time. Under this system, if you want money to expire, the Treasury has to tax it. And that we'll get into taxation later. So this would eliminate bank credit, Saudi says. So 3 bullet points. Access to paper greenbacks is a constitutional right under the GRA. And again, greenbacks are created under the borrowing clause, not the coinage clause. And there's a constitutional right to redeem paper greenbacks for current U.S. coin, created under the coinage clause. And it requires requires the Treasury to transfer money electronically using central bank electronic check, which is essentially functions as a currency. So we're familiar with the term CBDC, which is central bank digital currency, which the bank takes that money and views the CBDC as a token, as money itself. But strictly speaking, this CBEC is a check, but it's going to function that everybody's going to really, use it like money, like electronic money. So it does not regard, the GRA does not regard CBECs as digital tokens, actual money, but as money transfer tools or e-checks, which directs the Treasury to transfer money, cash, from one account to another. So the Treasury, everything is on the Treasury's ledger. There's no chance of, it is totally impossible for the banks to create bank credit from the system. So that's the, I think I don't know if was that 45 minutes? Stephen, should I zip through the next?
47 now.
All right. So why don't I keep going, and then we can, there's, I think, 10 slides in section 2. So in this part B, I just want to go through some Chicago plan differences. As I said before, the lineage for the NEAT Act is on the bottom right here. from Irving Fisher, who is not a greenbacker. He's considered the first celebrity economist, and that might have something to do with his widespread acceptance. He's not seeking the Simons complete separation. He strengthens the Fed as a private profit-making system. So again, this is the system, his plan of 1939, which is often called the Chicago Plan, which is kind of deceptive. It's really not. But the lineage for the Simons Plan is up here. It's Henry George. All these guys are greenbackers. Simons was anti-tariff and anti-monopoly, progressive income tax on all incomes. Henry George was progressive only on unearned incomes, but Simons was a little mistaken there. I'll explain that later. Zollinger studied George in depth in the early 2000s. I mentioned Simons and Saudi in Lost Science of Money, chapter 24, I think it is. And he wrote a 44-page paper on George, and he wanted it to, I have a geologist here, I shouldn't say geologist, but he wanted to incorporate the Georgist ideals in Title VI of the AMA 10. And Mike told me about this. And so he was really into studying Henry George on money. And he said that George had an advanced awareness of money. And I'll mention that later. But comparing the two plans, there's a lot to read here, so I'll just kind of pause it later when Stephen posts it on YouTube. But the Plan of 33 is by Simons. The Plan of 39 is Fisher. The Chicago Plan of 33 nationalizes the entire Fed system and replaces all Federal Reserve notes with greenbacks and current coin. It requires banks or government to hold 100% reserves. This is Simons recommended postal service banks. So in that case, it's not 100% reserve. It's the government actually owning it, like I'm suggesting in the government do in the GRA. He calls for a complete separation, make it impossible for banks to create effective money. And this is the main plan used by Stephen to Zollinger to create the AMA 10. Now, I just want to talk about the Henry George connection a little bit. Zollinger, along with several other Georgists, published a 44-page paper. This is linked in the reference materials also. He wrote that George had an advanced understanding of money, and that George was a greenbacker who corrected the monetary errors of Adam Smith. And as I said, he wanted to add a Georgist Title VI to the AMA 10 before it became the Need Act. And he followed Simons, who was a closet Georgist, in creating the AMA 10. It's very hard to get Simons to admit his sources. Here is probably the main influence on him. These guys were all classical liberals. Henry Simons, Harry Gunnison Brown, and Henry George, all classical liberals, not neoliberals like Irving Fisher, Friedman, and Hayek, etc. So Simons, not Irving Fisher, likely influenced whoever was working on Zollinger's AMA 10 before it became the Need Act. He likely studied the works of Harry Gunnison Brown. He actually wrote a review for one of Brown's books here. I got this from Ed Dodson from the Henry George School of Social Science. He also has Ed Dodson also has a great website called School of Cooperative Individualism. It's an unbelievable source of information. Anything to remotely do with Georgism, any author, he'll download it there. So here's a case of where Simons actually wrote a book review for Harry Gunnison Brown, who was an avid Georgist. And Brown also wrote this book on the right, Earned and Unearned Incomes, the theory of earned and unearned income. So it was, Simons would have read that. But this is the, here I want to mention that when Fisher started changing the Chicago plan, he kind of cherry picked from Simons's program. It was this was part 2. The currency and banking reform was just part 2 of a very comprehensive 5-part program. So the first part was increase government control over monopolies or their prevention entirely. That was part 2 in this positive program. Excuse me. Positive program just means a positive program for laissez-faire just means that government has to do certain things to prevent monopolies and to prevent enormous income and wealth inequality. They can't just lay back and just be completely hands off. So the second monetary reform was, well, actually, this isn't the right order, but progressive income and estate taxation to prevent extreme income and wealth inequality. He was very anti-tariff and he was pro-free trade. Tariffs cause wars. Most wars are rooted in tariffs and taxes. Most trade wars are trade wars, and the most trade wars are currency wars. So, and this he's calling for the government ownership of utilities and natural monopolies, or strict control over private ownership. George said the same thing, but George called for complete government ownership of utilities, and George called them natural monopolies. And where free market competition is not possible, the government has to step in and run those. This last one, Simons kind of put it on the back burner, but he did not like advertising and what I call psychopolitics, messing with our minds and perceptions, molding public opinion, and telling us what to buy and who to vote for. So he wanted to put a tax on advertising, and that was in the 30s. So this a lot of parts in this actually mirrored Henry George's national campaign, which unfortunately most Georgists don't recognize. They're sticking to the local property tax version that taxes land only and not buildings. But George had a very successful and quiet national campaign that actually led to the need for the 16th Amendment. So it's rooted in constitutional law and history. Simons believed, however, unlike George, Simons believed incorrectly that if income was progressively taxed, and no distinction between earned and unearned income would be necessary. And this proved to be incorrect after 1937, when the Supreme Court converted there's a case called Helvering v. Davis. And what started off as a Social Security Trust Fund deposit or contribution in 1935, the Supreme Court changed it in 37 and said, no, it's just a direct income tax, an ordinary income tax on the wage earner without being earmarked for any purpose. And not too many people know about this decision, but that's where the wage earner, the high taxes on wages we have now, that's where it started. What was I going to say about that? There's some nice papers out on what happened in the 1930s when the income tax went from being a class tax to a mass tax. I thought that was a good title. but the income tax originally was designed to only tax very high income earners. But here's when it got changed. And then we saw another income tax on wages in 42, another one in 65, and most recently we saw another one with the Obama healthcare. What do they call it? The penalty tax for not having insurance. So the Henry George platform of 1890, he called it the 1890 platform of the Single Tax League of the United States. This is what launched his national campaign, and it was published in every week in his newspaper. And this is just one clip out of it. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. This was suspended. His movement was suspended by the Supreme Court in 1895. But this platform calls for progressive income and estate taxation, anti-tariff and free trade, and government ownership of utilities. Excuse me again. Simons did not call for the non-taxation of wages, as George always required. So that's one area where Simons was kind of an error. But Simons is the main reformer of the 1930s. And now I got a few slides here to try to show the conflict between Fisher and Simons. So I say up above, imagine I use this example because Fisher used the word on all fours. So we found a picture of a horse, one standing and three laying down. But imagine there's a horse valet service claiming that only the horse standing on all fours belongs to the owner. Of course, the valet shouldn't own the horses. The valet only takes possession, and the horse should always belong to the owner. But imagine telling the other three owners, those are considered to be an unsecured loan to the valet companies. Mm-hmm. The valet can do whatever they want with those horses while they're in the valet's possession. So, so he makes it. He kind of mischaracterizes Simon's original Chicago plan, and he really distorts it from here on in. And he even insults at the end. He says, "I feel sure that a statistical study will convince you of this." That so he's Fisher is trying to explain that. See here, Fisher is trying to explain that savings accounts should belong to the bank. Checking accounts only should be the property of the account holder, and only checking accounts should be protected, and the bank should hold those in bailment. And but otherwise, banks should be able to do whatever they want with savings deposits. So, and then he tells Simons to basically disprove his own theory. And Simon's response was, he's kind of pleading with Fisher, much as to gain by coming to regard demand deposits as virtually equivalent to cash. But the main point is likely to be lost if we recognize that. Look what else he wants to protect as well. He wants to keep all this the property of the account holder, not just checks, not just checking accounts. So also savings deposits, treasury certificates, and even common commercial paper are almost as close to demand deposits as demand deposits to legal tender currency. So he's saying the banks will use all these deposits as to create effective money, and Fisher is trying to limit it to checking accounts only. which of course is what we see in the NEAT Act, a protection for checking accounts only. And Saudi says something similar from a different angle. He wants to put these accounts into make like a registry of deeds, so the banks can't lend them out more than once, and that's what a registry does. It avoids. We have registries for our houses and cars, and that's to prevent people from selling the same house twice or the same car two or three times. So this paper, I think, I don't know if I put this in the reference materials, but this article by Professor Rockoff from Rutgers University, I thought he summed it up nicely. He said, in retrospect, Simon's claim that savings deposits should be considered effective money has fared well. And Fisher's claims that savings deposits are not money and that interest-bearing assets cannot be money have fared badly. So he's wrote this article in 2020, and he's looking back over 80 or 90 years, and he's saying, you know, Simons was right all along. Fisher was not. So with these last few slides of this section, I just want to try to figure out where this Chicago plan of Fisher infiltrated Zollinger's movement here. This is from Wikipedia. It says the number of economists expressed approval of this new proposal. Copies were circulated at the 5th annual AMI conference of 2009. I don't know the date on that, but and that would have been probably a few months after Zollinger gave that that video at the beginning of the lecture. And the fourth bullet point, I say Zollinger seems to be aware of the Fisher plan in 2002 because it's mentioned in his book. Does not seem to know that it's radically different than the Simons plan. The NEAT Act of 2011 was based on this new Fisher-Douglas plan, but not the Simons 1933 plan, upon which he was building the AMA. He states in chapter 24 of Lost Science of Money that Robert DeFremery gave the AMI a rare copy of the Fisher Chicago plan. This must have been around 2002, because that's when the book was published, unless there was a later publication. But he seems to assume that the Fisher Chicago plan is essentially the same as the original 1933 Simon Saudi plan he'd been working on. He mentions that he mentions on page 666 that Treasury Direct paper and electronic greenbacks should be directly issued by the government in the same way that U.S. current coin is, and that much higher denomination copper-clad coinage should be issued as well. And again, this goes to John Conroy's idea of a high-value coinage. So rather than trying to eliminate cash, raise the it would also give Congress enormous seniorage income. But the NEAT Act required none of this, instead calling vaguely for new U.S. money, so with no grounding in U.S. coinage. And the term U.S. money always bothered me. Being a lawyer, I don't like words that are ambiguous or vague. And we really don't know exactly what U.S. money is. But I suspect it's they kept it vague to allow for a three-circuit system where the banks are still lending and maybe creating money either by check through the check system or otherwise, but also the Treasury is feeding money in on the third circuit. So by keeping the word U.S. money vague, that would allow for that. And finally, in this section, again, Zollinger already had a plan in effect before it became the NEAT Act. It was American Monetary Act of 2010, and he stated that the NEAT Act faithfully contains all the reforms of his AMA 10, but did it? Big question. I don't think so. From chapter, again, from chapter 24, the three reforms: fold the Fed into Treasury, end the creation of money as bank credit, and then open the new valve to spending greenbacks for the general welfare while closing the old valve that creates money as bank credit. And then we entirely dismantle the old money pipeline that's being dismantled over a 2-year period. And it's also significant that Zollinger said in the book, there to be no compromise on these three reforms, and they must all occur together. I don't have a page number there, but he said that in Science of Money. So now I just have a few slides left. I might as well, unless anybody wants me to stop. 10 o'clock. Should I keep going, Stephen?
We have so many more minutes. It depends if you wanted to take questions now, or if you feel like you need to finish something up, Richard. It's your choice.
Why don't I zip through these, and then they'll at least be recorded when you post it on YouTube, and then we can get to the questions. Is that all right?
Well, let's see what kind of time we have. Those slides are going to take a while.
Right,
It might be another. I bet those slides would be another presentation in themselves.
I think you're right. So, I'll just spend like 10 seconds on each slide, and then there's just 3 at the end.
Okay, see what you can do.
There's a dozen left. So this is the preamble. It's similar to John's in the AMRA. Just kind of a housekeeping section. Here's where I incorporate the Fed into the Treasury. Title 1. These are the actual section names. In Title 2, I end the creation of money as bank credit and convert existing bank credit into Treasury direct money. These are the actual sections of Title 2. Basically, what we're doing is the Monetary Board is supervising through the Federal Reserve regional banks. We're splitting up the banks. Treasury is buying the stock, and that was an important find by John about the NEAT Act saying buying of assets versus buying of stock. That's a huge thing that John discovered, and so this is buying. The Treasury here is completely buying out the banks and dissolving the state chartered corporation, putting the checking accounts into this Treasury direct system, while putting it doesn't want anything to do with lending, so it's going to put that into these investment trusts. And these can be real estate investment trusts, mutual funds, mortgage lenders, various risk levels. The checking accounts do not provide loans. The Treasury direct system, they're not going to provide loans. They don't pay interest, and they don't charge for fees. And there's no FDIC insurance because Treasury is self-insured. Basically, this is what happens. Gross debt is owed to Treasury for taking over the bank's outstanding loans and relieving the bank customer deposits, minus the bank's holding of U.S. securities. This I got from the AMA 10. Roughly, I tried to analyze it from there. And any additional payments, and then as the loan principal comes in, the bank is paying, the new investment corporation is paying that back to the Treasury. Eventually, they don't owe the debt to the Treasury anymore. Title 3 spending. I did delete the long laundry list that John was talking about. So, and I did resurrect, these are the 3 sections of the sections, and I added this from Zollinger's desire to address the housing in the mortgage crisis. He was interested in Henry George for that. And also, this is regarding a Henry George proposal, and this is a good way to feed money into the economy as the government takes over utilities that are monopolies. And I resurrected this from the AMA 10, which the NEED Act did not carry over. And there's got to be some way to punish and prosecute the bankers if they, anyway, with obstruct the return to constitutional money. So I put that back in. The NEED Act put that out again because it tends to be banker friendly. So anything to do with obstructing or fraud is going to be prosecuted. And now on the appendix, I just want to 2 slides. I want to project this system once the U.S. corrects itself. How do you project this globally? Because obviously we're in a global economy now, and this would happen through the UN, the IMF. But first, the U.S. has to correct itself, and then it can go through the UN and go globally. And maybe this will be a good job for the 200 whatever military bases. They can become sub-treasuries and distributing coin and using through the treasury to access them. But these are a few quotes from Henry George. I won't read them all, but he wants to make the world trade as peacefully and freely as the 50 states. And he wants to know, why the 50 states. Well, they weren't 50 when he wrote, but why do the 50 states trade relatively peaceful within the United States? So to get the same thing for the 195 countries of the world, the UN would need to, and the Constitution provides for all these. This is what made the U.S. successful. We denied the power of each state to create its own currency. So these are some of the things the UN would have to do to get a global currency, a uniform global currency based on the U.S. dollar. Might be called the UN dollar. But we'd have to prohibit countries from taxing the free trade of another, and also from all these things here. One last slide. What if we had an emergency and the system breaks down again and Congress is blindsided again, like it was in 2008? Some say the next one's going to be worse. If that happens and the GRA is not implemented, I was working on some kind of a executive order plan where the changes could be made through executive order temporarily, and then codified into law, a few months later. And this is what happened after the great collapse in 1929. FDR had a bunch of executive orders, and some of them became law a few months later. So that's just something I'm contemplating. So that's I'm not sure. I didn't get specifically into the act, but that'll do it.
Thank you very, very much, John, Richard. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
We have a lot of questions. Oh, maybe is Howard? I mean, I guess Mike should be doing this, but I don't know if Mike's here right now.
I'm still here, yes.
Okay, you want to moderate then? I think Howard has a question. I have several questions too, but I can hold my breath.
Likewise, yeah, I have a few questions for you, but we'll let Howard go. Howard, if you're ready, please go ahead.
All right. Well, Rick, that was very interesting. At least the first part. The part I could stay awake for, but I thought I liked your radical approach. I thought I'm with the Green Party, the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, and I think a more radical approach might appeal to the party more than what we've been doing, which has been modeled on the NEAT Act. So I'm kind of interested in some of that because we ought to bring the greenback back, right? And but I was curious why you called it a Federal Reserve note, which I was offended by almost. I felt like, a federal note, of course, Federal Reserve note is what we have, and a note denotes debt, and that has a psychological impact on people, and it's not a good one. And we are issuing money, so it's United States money. It's money issued as money. It's not credit. It's not a commodity. It's money issued as money. And I just thought that, as Sadi said, it's the most vital prerogative of democratic self-governance. And anyway, I enjoyed the thing, and I'll have to check it out more. And I'd love to get a copy of your slides, actually, so I could study them more. and I bet you have a whole lot of ideas about lots of connection. I see lots of books on your shelf. You have a lot of connection to history, and history is so important. And I keep thinking, boy, I'd love to see a screenplay written, a movie, a book about Henry Simons and Sadi and Fisher, the celebrity. And I think it could make it an exciting kind of movie if we dramatize it up. Anyway,
I just want to say how I had the same problem with the Federal Reserve note, and that I got from Simons, his program of laissez-faire, and I struggled months with that, where he's calling for the Federal Reserve to become the one currency, even to the point of getting rid of the U.S. notes. But it occurred to me why he's doing that is because he's folded the Treasury he's folded the Fed into the Treasury completely. So now the Fed is the Treasury after Simons. Of course, that never.
There's still a psychological connection to people about all that. I think it'd be kind of hanging on to the old.
Yes. I'm trying to make the transition, though, as least disruptive as possible. There are trillions of Federal Reserve notes around the globe, so
nationalizing the Fed, and would you have postal banks be like the sub or the branches for the Fed banks in the cities? Is that
no? They don't call for postal banks. Simons did recommend that, but I'm calling for, with the digital age, I think the Treasury has to take over it directly.
Yeah. Go ahead. Somebody else has questions.
Post office.
Thanks, Howard.
You bet.
Thank you,
Joe.
Okay, we can go to Joe Polito.
Hi. Thanks very much for that. I know you've been putting an incredible amount of work into this, all as one person. It's amazing. A question this is a general question, but a question for you, for Steve, for John Howell, for Mike. You folks have been around for quite some time. You've done a lot of research. The fact that the NEAT Act actually almost got, to the legislative floor, it was in committee. It's just amazing. And when I was working on some material for John Hodson, there was a reference to a fellow by the name of Ken Bonesack, and he had a bill, and apparently it had sponsors too, and I don't know how far it went, but I just wondered if Zarlenga had any connection with that as well, or any monetary reformers that we know. I put the information in the chat there, but I just wondered if any of you had come across that, and if there has been, if we've been kind of close before. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd never heard that Joe. I never heard of Ken.
Ken Bonsek. I'm familiar with him. I can respond to that maybe a little bit later, but that would be another topic almost. He had a proposal for getting federal money out, and he was very much into infrastructures, but he wasn't that much into bank reform, though. And so this is a much more serious undertaking here. I'll get my hand down, but I'm going to throw out a few questions. I don't know if they need to be answered, but I just want them to get them into people's thought process. Some of my questions is in positive money in their 2014 banking reform, they too turned the money over to their central bank. So their checking deposits, if you're not investing your money and you just want the bank, you want your money to be good when you go back and get that same amount of money, you would take it to the bank in England, or one of the few banks in England, and then you give that money, and then the bank automatically gives that money over to the Bank of England, and it's not for them to even think about for themselves to use. So that money is passed on. That's positive money, or in their banking reform bill, and I'm wondering about what thoughts might be about that. Then some other questions I have are Michael Kumhoff's, when he worked with the Chicago plan, and he has assumptions that he's using for his calculating, and I'm wondering if he's truly using the 100%. It seems like he might be using a little bit of Simon's thinking around this difference between savings money and checking account money. For him, they may be sort of similar there. I'm not sure what's going on there. And then also, I'm just thinking about Kumhoff and Omarova and four others came up with this, social equity money, and Huber creating a register of money. So, money is treasury money in your thinking, and it would just come to circulation off of a registrar. And then for investment, you have a national investment authority. Omarova's thinking there. I'm just curious how some of these go along with your thinking. But anyhow, overall, Richard, I'm very enamored with your thinking and work, and I really appreciate it. And I'm trying to think of ways we can go further into the Zarlanga stuff if you're interested. It's a resource that should be available to you as you need things.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. I would like to echo just appreciation for Rick as well. Rick, you're a very real asset and major contributor to AMI and AFJM, and I'd want to say thank you for all of your work.
John,
we got John.
John gave me some coaching. He said, put those slides of Zarlinga right up front. I said, he's right. I put them up front. Show Zarlinga's book right on. They used to tell me in law school, don't hide your lead.
Well, he's why we're here, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John, go ahead.
John Conroy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. While you're giving the presentation, I took down notes. Just two things I think could help improve the presentation, because you went kind of fast on. One of them was you said that we could use the Treasury Direct system, which the federal government already has in place. So, I think people might want to know, what is it? What's it doing now? How does it work? And a few things about that, because you went through it kind of quickly. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing was, we're always going over this back and forth, especially with the bulletin board at AFJM. The second thing is that the greenbacks relied on a different justification than coins. So coins are authorized in the coinage clause, but greenbacks weren't. And that was a long, laborious process to get to that final decision. I believe it was four cases about the greenbacks? So finally, the fourth case kind of put everything to rest.
The legal tender cases were nine cases, I count.
Okay, it took 9 cases to get us to agree that the greenbacks were in fact constitutional. And so people might want to know that there was a lot of back and forth on this, and that was the final outcome. The justification is different than, the justification for coins.
Yeah, that's a subtle point. Greenbacks are always constitutional as receivable money, but to be legal tender, and that's what the legal tender cases were all about, they had to be redeemable for coin, which is in our wheelhouse here. But if they're not redeemable for coin, they're not this, because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows Congress to make something legal tender. There has to be derived from there has to be an implied power that's derived from some clause. So right after the Civil War, they're trying to search for a clause that would justify an unredeemable greenback, and there's nothing that they could find, and they all agreed that you can't use the coinage clause. So they realized that the framers had a debate about, they reasoned that through the borrowing money clause they could derive an implied power, but the greenback would have to be redeemable.
Yeah, and through the bulletin board conversations on AFJM, it became apparent that it would be really good if you could point to like the exact 3 or 4 sentences in the exact Supreme Court case that was the final determinant. And I have read it. You have showed it to me. You had presented that information in the past. It's very nuanced, and it takes a little thinking to like understand it. So that would just be my observation. You might want to spend a little time on that and flesh out how long it took to really decide what was a greenback. What really was it legally?
Kristan Desan, when she presented here, she said that was the first thing she taught her law students, were those legal tender cases.
Yes, Stephen, she mentioned specifically the Juliet versus Greenman case.
Mm-hmm.
Final case. That's the important one, because that controls. So that's the 1884 Juliet versus Greenman, and she was studying that case. She quoted from it.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, John.
All right, Stephen, quick procedural question here. We are at 9:30. Our session technically ends at 10. We have wrap-up scheduled for right now. We have 2 hands still going here, so I'm happy to keep going with questions if we're all good.
Yeah, I would like to go for 10, 15 more minutes in terms of that. And then, I don't know, we have 3 more days to go, and this is just the baby day, but it's a big one. So anyhow, let's use the time though and keep going. This is a rich conversation, and I think it'll come up again. And I think it also, we can get questions out of this to bring up to some of the other presenters, including Macmillan too. So I'll be quiet now.
Okay, I have some questions, but I'm going to hand it over to others who have questions. So Nick, you're next. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Hey, great presentation, Rich. I appreciated it.
Thanks.
I'm getting to the same thing about the constitutionality. That you believe that, or at least the Supreme Court decisions, the legal tender decisions, that they ruled something was only money if it was a coin. Is that because the Congress shall have power to coin money? Is that what they based it on, or?
Coins are issued under the coinage clause.
Yeah, but okay, but does the coinage clause? I mean, we call it the coinage clause. It doesn't say that in the Constitution, though, does it? It just says Congress has the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, as I remember. And we call it the coin. I think people call it the coinage clause because they assume that's creating coins and not creating money. But at the time the Constitution was written, the only money we had were the bills of credit that the states had issued. That was the money systems that we all used. So, and the word coin means create just as much as it means make something into a coin. So you can take the interpretation of that phrase to mean Congress has the power to create money, which could be coins, it could be paper money, it could be blips on a computer screen or entries in a banking accounting computer or whatever.
It could be wampum or seashells too.
And every state and every colony also used wampum as money. Every single one.
I know, but that's a myth that's very hard to expose, or people have it in there. I think it comes from that Nadelson paper, and Nadelson said right in the paper, it's an interpretive theory. It's not a Supreme Court decision by any means.
Right, I understand. He was arguing that theory.
So, but nowhere in the Supreme Court legal history are they saying that to coin means to create.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying you're a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not saying that. But just because the Supreme Court has not made that ruling or even investigated that doesn't mean that that's true.
Well, if you think of money as a creature of the law, it has everything to do with it. Coins are the money, and paper is a borrowing of the coin. And as I said in the slides, the electronic is really a check. It's an electronic check is where you direct the Treasury to, or the bank to transfer money to somebody. It's a directive like a paper check. So,
well, I think we need to take this to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Not the present one. And interesting, Nadelson is a Federalist, you know. He's a member of the Federalist Society.
I like his writing on taxation, but not the money. And
when we did some writing earlier, Hovert made contact with him and was asked him a few questions about it. He wanted nothing to do with us. Absolutely. Oh, I don't even remember that. I wrote that paper, and
Hovert didn't tell me that
now, but he might, because he was the one that had the contact with him.
He took it down. He published like 40 or 50 papers on SSRN. But that one, he pulled it. He doesn't.
Anyway, great presentation. Thank you.
I have your book, by the way, Nick.
Oh, good.
Thanks, Nick. All right, Randy's up next. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah. I think I'm losing my voice too, Rick. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the presentation. I just, well, there's 2 points I wanted to talk about, but you made the reference there about the money being like light. Was that an Einstein analogy?
Yeah, who was that? Was Varoufakis there?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I just
had to be both a particle and a wave, right? So it's supposed to be both a representative unit and a physical item, right? Is that, do you buy into that? Is that a...
Yeah, well, money is both. It's not purely a physical thing, and it's not purely a intangible.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if that's the tenet, then all money that we have has to have some physical substance to it somewhere, right?
I think so. I think it has to have.
Good. Yeah, I'd buy into that. I think that's the only way people are ever going to figure it out.
Crypto people would not like to hear that, but
no, I'm certain of that. I'm certain of that.
You want the electronic in their imagination to be the money,
right?
Yeah. But the funny thing is that when they do ads and stuff, they show physical coins. Like you'll see a Bitcoin coin, which it doesn't exist, but they want reassure you that it's a physical thing. It's not.
Yeah, it's like the mystical monetary tour. Yeah. The other point I had was the free trade stuff. I don't know what to say. I guess if there's an assertion here that the Georgists have a deep or Henry George had a deep understanding of money, and if that's the case, then I don't know how he can get to free trade. I don't understand what's at work there. But until that is worked out, I don't know. There's a big thorn in the lion's paw right there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that needs to be looked at, Randy, comparing that to the parity tariff that we think about. I'm in the same place as you. I'm trying to put that together.
Right.
George wrote a book called Protection or Free Trade in the 1880s. Right. And that pretty much killed the tariff. And then that's why they started looking into the income tax, because government wasn't getting their revenue. And
right. Yeah.
His claim was that I think where national defense or something like that is involved, I don't think you would allow it.
No, improperly understood, a tariff is a monetary measure, not a trade measure. It has to do with the value of money. The domestic value versus the international trade value. And if everybody here is smarter than Ben Franklin, then I'll shut up.
No, you're making a good point.
Yeah.
International trade is on a substance for substance basis. Always has been, always will be. The push for free trade is a push for managed trade. That's why the WTO sits out there. There is no free trade. Never has been, never will be.
Oh, yeah.
It's all managed trade. It's a question of who's doing the managing for whose benefit. And until we take our own monetary valuation domestically into our own hands through government and establish that our price structure is embodied in our money and the purchasing power of it, and that tariffs are needed in order to make sure that our costs can be met through our earnings and not through trying to cheat somebody across the border somewhere, then we've got a hole in our pocket and it'll never get sewn shut.
Yeah, I know it's a sensitive area, but I guess the theory is that whenever you levy a tariff, you're increasing you're increasing the cost. Trump says no, it's raising revenue, and the other side will say no, it's raising the cost.
Yeah, and nobody understands it. Nobody's put the time into figuring it out. And other than the Raw Materials National Council, people like George Peake and such folks.
You can pretty much
they were chased out of the government years ago. So
yeah, levying heavy taxes will cause trade wars, though.
But our job is to take all of these various ideas from these great people in the past and put them together, and perhaps in some new ways. And maybe in some ways we have to reinvent things, but hopefully we can put together a good package of ideas that.
Well, the trade wars that you referenced are caused by the seeking for profit in places where you can't find it now. And if our own domestic situation is profitable, then there is no seeking across the border.
No, I know what you mean.
So thanks, Rick. I did enjoy the presentation, and so
I used to be in the fishing industry, and sometimes the dealers would drive the price of the fisherman's catch, drive it down to nothing, and they would go on strike. So
sure.
I see what you're getting at.
Yep.
Great comments, Randy. Thank you. Yeah, reminding us that there is no free trade. There's only trade to freely exploit labor. All right, John Howell, please go ahead.
Well, I want to come back to this discussion that was earlier about the constitutionality of the greenbacks, because it seems to me, I mean, I was once convinced by the argument that Nick Ignatz provided, that we ought to just be able to justify this by the coinage clause. But I think the Constitution makes it really clear that that's inadequate in terms of the intention of the framers. And the reason why is because although when talking about what the Congress could do, they said they could coin money. But when they talked about what the states could do, they listed no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, or grant letters of marque and a reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit. Coin money and emit bills of credit were listed as two separate things in the minds of the framers. So it's clear that coin money did not mean emitting bills of credit. So I think that's why, as Rick has explained, that the legal profession, in trying to defend the greenbacks, really recognized that coinage clause did not do the trick, because that was not the intent of the framers of the Constitution, and that's why they had to look for this crazy kind of justification through the borrowing clause. But it was the only thing they could do. So I think it's really clear that, and Rick, thanks for making that clear to me. I didn't realize that beforehand, and you've made that clear.
Well, the only other thing I'd like to add, John, is that the Fed, as I said, the Federal Reserve note since 1934 has been unconstitutional. That should not be a legal tender note. That never should have become legal tender. So they have to cover their tracks somehow. And the theory would be Nadelson tried the best he could. We'll just say that the power of making something legal tender comes from the coinage clause and the commerce clause. But I don't think even he believed his own paper after a while.
Well, it seems like a common sense paper, that in terms of what Nick is pointing out, and some others.
I'd like to jump in here. This was one of my sort of questions or comments. I definitely encourage people to revisit the section I was reading from in Law Science of Money, because it talks specifically about the lack of understanding that the founders had about money, and their view of money as commodity, the Adam Smith view, which is a very primitive view of money. You may even think that a more primitive style of money could have been more in alignment with, say, Aristotle. Aristotle had a better understanding than Adam Smith. To say that the founders and the people who wrote the Constitution demanded that paper be borrowed from coin is a plausible explanation. But the underlying factor here that we have to consider is both the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, or Clause 2 interpretation grants the money power, the money creation authority to the government. Okay? Congress has that authority. So regardless of the interpretation, the money power should be with government. And I don't think that there's no denying that fact. Now, whether or not it's the coinage clause or the borrowed money clause that is the permitting factor here, I think we have moved beyond that, and our need to have a different monetary framework is clearly evident as one of those things. Because if, and it may very well be the case that, paper money is borrowed from coins, that is a very, I would say, again, primitive or unnecessary thing that we do not need to have anymore. And we need to update our monetary legislation, which gives more emphasis on the work that we're doing here, so that we can have a 21st century monetary system that works in the interest of the people and not of the speculators, the rentier class, that seeks to utilize the technical nuances of the system for their own benefit. So that's all I want to say. Please do reread that section from Zarlenga pertaining to the framers' understanding of money, because it is definitely something that we as a monetary reform organization need to understand clearly, that the Constitution was very light on monetary understanding. So I have a few other questions, but I'm going to turn it over to other folks here. We still have some hands up. We're going to keep going. We have, I think, Eric is next. So Eric, please go ahead. Eric, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Mike, I just want to add one quick comment that when coins were made of gold or silver, there was never any question that coins are relevant. It's just the fact that they became cheap metal. But if they all of a sudden became high value, like John's recommending, a $10,000 or even $1,000 or $100 coin, all of a sudden coins would be would seem like money again. So it just has to do. It's a psychological thing.
Yeah, the borrowed money clause makes sense if you understand that the framers believed that gold and silver were money. It makes total sense.
Yeah, one little point of information, let me chime in. And that is one of the first things that Congress did was to create the rules for the coins. And they said they could be gold, silver, and copper, and they never said you could create a paper coin. So it's kind of like the Constitution is the beginnings, and then they had to work on it. And it's a work in progress, and you have the Bill of Rights, and you have amendments and things that came subsequent. But one of the very first things they did was, I think, create the Coinage Clause of 1792, and there's no mention of any paper currency.
Well, you know, John, on that theme, on the borrowed money clause, the original wording was, Congress shall have power to borrow money and emit bills on the credit of the United States. And there was a big discussion. So what to do about that? Because they were gonna agitate the big money people if Congress could issue bills of credit, because the banks wanted to do that. So they had a discussion. Some wanted to ban the power. Some said just don't say anything about it, and that's what they decided. So they decided that the words "and emit bills" are there, they're implied, but we're not going to write them into the Constitution. And that came out in the legal tender cases as well. So it is in there. I'm not convinced that the framers were that negligent, but they were a little bit political there by not spelling out the power and emit bills in that borrowing clause. But it should have been in there. It is in there. It's just silent.
Well, yeah, again, revisit that section from Zarlenga, because please pardon me, Eric. Here, I'm going to read a little bit from 396, Law Science of Money. Convention downplayed U.S. experience. By the time of the convention, the great benefits of the Continentals were nearly ignored, along with much of the rest of our hard-won monetary experiences. Many wanted to emphasize that the Continentals became worthless. They placed all abstract fiat money under that cloud and rejected the idea of paper money altogether. They ignored the fact that paper money was crucial in giving us a nation, that abstract money usually requires an advanced legal system in place, that the normal method of assuring its acceptability is to allow the taxes to be paid in it. And then there was the little matter of a war against the world's strongest power. And he goes on to talk about, for example, Locke. Locke viewed money as a pledge for wealth rather than wealth itself. Mankind agreed to put an imaginary value on gold and silver because of their durableness, scarcity, and not being likely to be counterfeited, making them the standard pledges. Having as money no other value except pledges, it is evident that the intrinsic value of silver and gold used in commerce depends on their quantity. So again, a great section where Zarlenga clearly elucidates for everyone how the Constitutional Convention did not absorb the data from history, did not learn the lessons from the past, and that's why we're left with the system that we are, completely compromised and usurped by private interests.
Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Eric now.
Hello, this is Eric from the Philippines. Thank you, Mr. Richard's talks on the restoration of the U.S. greenbacks. But I'm worried, I doubt, because of becoming CBDC in the United States and the rest of the world. By the way, I remember in the history of the Philippines with the United States, having gained independence from the United States at the end of World War II. And with the establishment of the Philippine Central Bank, according to the United States. With the coming of the Americans in 1898, modern banking and currency and credit system were instituted, making the Philippines one of the most prosperous countries in the Southeast Asia then. The Americans at the time instituted a monetary system for the Philippines based in gold and pegged the Philippine peso to American dollar at the ratio of 2:1. And as I remember in the reading, the U.S. Congress approved the Coinage Act for the Philippines in the 1903. So as far as I remember, the American monetary system has a great influence on the Philippines, being the former colony of the United States of America. What then is the present situation? Thank you.
It'd be interesting to see those laws, Eric, for us, and because we know very little about that history here. We don't learn it in the schools really, and that's sort of advanced. But how Congress acted in that way would be interesting for us to learn. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
So-
Many Americans are not aware about the impacts of the American colony during the time, how the money was created during the American colony of the Philippines. So you only know what is going on there in America, but you don't know what's going on at the time of American colonization to those countries, even until at present. I think the Philippine government is under the U.S. Federal Reserve System, other than the control of the BIS in Switzerland. Thank you.
We're learning. Thank you, Eric. Joe.
Yeah, I put it in the chat again. John Howell, I'm not sure you quite accurately described what the states couldn't do. It seems to say that the states could create gold and silver coins. Couldn't do anything else, but they could do that. So it kind of muddies the water a little, if I've read that correctly. But it doesn't matter. I think Mike Holden hit the nail on the head. The federal government has the power to create money, and perhaps there needs to be some tweaking of legislation or so forth. But I don't think it's an obstacle to our cause. Somehow it can be done. History has shown it could be done, and as I say, I think Mike Holden nailed it.
We don't have to be, burdened with that vestige from history. Like the gold standard is a relic, and we no longer have to live under those kinds of constraints. All right. I have a few things. I'm going to try to go through this quickly, Rick. So one question that I had was pertaining to how are you with the GRA going to ensure that the government can authenticate all of the digital greenbacks? We've had this discussion previously, but I still think it's like something that needs to be resolved. It seems possible that there really is no way of stopping counterfeiting digital greenbacks, or at least there may be a possibility that greenbacks could be counterfeited if there isn't some kind of what I would like to refer to as a tokenization. And I know you're opposed to tokenization, but the reality is that's only making sort of like I wouldn't say necessarily a physical item to represent the money, but at least there is some kind of a tangible record of the money that can be traced. And I think that would help with authentication purposes. So, Rick, your thoughts on how is the government going to ensure we don't have any counterfeiting happening with digital greenback?
Yeah, well, I have the government taking over the checking accounts in ordinary banks. So how does an ordinary bank authenticate now? Uh,
Clearing and settling. It's with other banks, I would say. You're talking about with the bank deposits currently, right?
transaction accounts at a normal bank, whatever authentication they have now, that would come under the Treasury.
Well, the savings accounts could still, not be subject to those kinds of authentication requirements. Maybe there's some additional thinking that needs to happen here, and we can talk offline about it. That's one concern that I have, and I guess one final comment from my side here, Rick, is the idea of putting all the transaction accounts with the government. That's a big shift. That is a massive thing that the government would be responsible for. So it requires a substantial amount of infrastructure, I would say, to make sure that that happens, and a lot of government overhead. So do you see any issues with any kind of excessive government bureaucracy or bloat in the government? That could be, another problem that we have. We have right now private control of the money. So, that's creating the problems, but maybe having government control could pose a series of problems as well.
Yeah, there's no way around it. The government has, if we believe that the government should make the money, they also have to control it, especially the way the banks have taken control of the check system and they create money as check. I guess we don't have privacy now. I don't think, I guess if you really want privacy under the GRA, you'd want cash. You'd every time you got a check, you'd cash it. But then it's gonna be very difficult to purchase things if you have to always deal with cash, especially out of state. But yeah, we have no privacy now, so I think it's an illusion too that cryptos will give you a peer-to-peer only, but there is they can track down transactions in crypto. So I think that's an illusion that, unless you're dealing with cash, you're exposed to, your privacy is exposed.
Well, as long as we have a rigid legal framework that prohibits the government from just arbitrarily seizing people's money or surveilling them, their use of money, then I don't think that the privacy or any kind of totalitarian concerns are valid, as long as we have a bulwark against it. I'm just wondering if there may be bloat or excessive bureaucracy even that could be problematic, So we're at 10 o'clock Central here, folks. So it's time to wrap up. I would like to thank our speakers here tonight. Everybody did really great. Once again, thank you to all of the attendees.